The early Kabbalists were attuned to this infinite awareness. How did they get it? They did not have the huge libraries available to us, nor were they in contact with most of the world. Yet the transmission came through. We can see the signs of this awareness in works written thousands of years ago. The answer is that they gained their insight through constant practice, total immersion in their spiritual lives, and deep contemplative meditation. They, as spiritual teachers in all traditions, discovered that gaining the wisdom of mystical insight could be accomplished only through guidance and advice, but could never be communicated directly. The Kabbalistic analogy is quite straightforward. Awareness is viewed as the purest form of light, and all of creation is viewed as a vessel. The shape and strength of a vessel will determine how much light it can hold. Moreover, as the light of awareness is infinite, every vessel holds its maximum capacity at all times. The Kabbalistic teaching is that we cannot add more light to go beyond a vessel's capacity. Rather, we must work on the vessel itself, repair and strengthen the vessel, and the light will automatically fill it. This key teaching is the underpinning for all spiritual work in Kabbalah. From the perspective of human beings, our bodies, minds, and emotions are the vessel for the light of the soul. Too often, students of spirituality attempt to go for the light without considering the vessel. The secret of spiritual development, according to the Kabbalists, is to mend, repair, and refine our bodies, minds, and emotions. And the soul will automatically benefit with greater light. So the approach of this series on the Mystical Kabbalah will be to work with your vessel. By this I mean that the teaching method we can accomplish on tape is much more intimate than the way Kabbalah is taught through books. We will be using stories and meditations in a way that will help prepare you and your inner listener so that you will be more receptive and more open to the nuances and depths of Kabbalistic wisdom. Thus, through this series of lessons, we will be discussing many of the Kabbalistic concepts in non-traditional ways. We will look at the 4 primary levels of creation and meditate on how they apply to our everyday lives. We will explore the tree of life in terms of its interrelationships with everything we do. We will look at the Kabbalistic perspective of good and evil. We will look at the Kabbalistic idea of the source of creation, the sparks of holiness within all things, the creation and presence of angels, the concept of perfection, the will of the Creator, the idea of giving and receiving, and the idea that we are co-creators of the universe. We will be listening to Hasidic tales and experiencing many forms of Kabbalistic meditation that will bring the teachings home through our intuition and our inner listener. Kabbalah has rarely been taught this way before, so you are invited to sit back and enjoy this series, and you are encouraged to repeat the meditations time and again as you deepen your experience with Kabbalistic insight and strengthen the vessel of your being. Now, before we address the Kabbalah itself, let us begin by getting a general overview of mysticism so that we can understand the mystical perspective of life and the awareness that is connected with it. Mysticism is an approach to our reality that's somewhat different from the normal, rational, intellectual perspective of life. The mystical approach says there are things happening that go beyond the senses. There are things happening in other realities. All we need to do is to learn how to attune to these other realities. Mystics have different traditions that they use as vehicles for attunement. What's fascinating about the study of mysticism is that almost all of the mystics have the same language, have a way of communing with one another in a way that transcends the limitations of individual traditions. So a Sufi mystic can commune with a Christian mystic, and they can sit with a Jewish mystic or a Buddhist mystic, and all be speaking the same language. It's as if there's what was once described to me as the mystical fragrance. When you're dwelling in the mystical fragrance, then all differences fall away. The mystical experience is much more universal than is commonly believed. Many people, from their rational perspective, look at mystics as if they're unique or strange or in some way gifted beings on this earth, that they were struck with a special light that transformed them into a different reality. But mystical insight is much more common than we realize. Anything that we experience that takes us out of our regular awareness of the past and the future and brings us completely into the moment where there is no sense of time is a mystical experience. For example, if you're walking in the woods and you're drawn to a butterfly landing on a flower, in that moment where you let go of everything that you brought to your walk and you're not thinking about what you're going to do when you go back home, in that moment there's an uplifting of the heart. And that's a mystical experience. When you walk into a room and there's an infant who looks up, gazes, and makes some kind of connection, your heart melts and opens, time falls away. That is a mystical experience. And so there are many types of mystical experiences. There are some like these that are instantaneous, that lighten our hearts for the moment, and then we continue in our normative state of mind. There are others that are more intense, that often happen in times of stress, when we're very ill, or when, God forbid, a friend or a family member is in the dying process or has just passed away. We'll often have experiences where time disappears and we make a connection with some unknown world that profoundly touches our heart. Those are more intense, and we can remember those for days and sometimes for weeks after they occur. Often, even years later, we can remember that moment when we had a special connection with something, somewhere, that transcended our normal reality. Occasionally, there are the big mystical experiences, the transformative experiences, those when we're touched in a way that our lives are altered forever from that time forward. Those are the kinds of experiences that many spiritual seekers want to have, look for, or expect to have if they practice long enough and hard enough. Many say that those experiences only happen through the grace of God, or through the grace of something, and that it's not predictable when such an experience will occur. It is true that we cannot predict when mystical experiences will occur, but we can enhance the potential for being in the frame of mind and for being receptive enough so that we're much more aware when the smaller mystical experiences are occurring, and frankly they're occurring all the time, and we enhance the possibilities for having the bigger experiences just by allowing ourselves to be present in the moment as often as we possibly can. And this is the practice of awareness of the moment. Now, all of the teachings that we're going to be discussing in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah are very much dependent upon the ability of the listener to listen and be present. Oftentimes, people have difficulties with Kabbalah in particular because the teachings seem to be very abstract. Indeed, they can be. My own access into my understanding of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah has come from my practice in quieting and in listening, and I have found that the greatest teacher really does speak from within when enough time and space is given to allow it its voice. Now, mystics have a universal language. They somehow commune with each other in a language of commonality, and yet there are many different traditions that can lead to higher awareness that we sometimes identify as mystical consciousness or mystical awareness. Different traditions have different approaches or different disciplines to enhance the possibility for higher awareness. As they say in many of the traditional worlds, all the paths ultimately lead to the same goal. And Judaism is no exception from this belief. There are various paths up the mountain, so to speak, but there's only one ultimate reality that in the West we call the divine reality. And in other traditions it has different names, such as Buddha mind, the unborn, the unconditioned. In the Kabbalah we call it the Ein Sof, the infinite nothingness. So some people ask, then why choose one path over another? Is one path better than another? And the answer that I found for myself is, yes, in fact, some paths are better than others from a subjective point of view. Objectively, no path is any better than any other. Subjectively, some paths are more conducive to our nature, more conducive to our way of being. So I would say to you, as you explore your spiritual path, try out various traditions, see what works for you. Then find a practice and work with it. And on occasion, perhaps explore other paths to see how it will enhance your personal path. But as is said in a wonderful teaching, if you're looking for water, it's much better to drill one deep well than to dig many shallow holes. I'm here to talk about the deep well of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. It's often been hidden from Jews as well as the rest of the world, and it's a tradition that has always excited deep interest among people of